Good morning, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the latest event in our 2014 GRC series. 3 things you didn't know and what's new in Approva, or Infor Approva Continuous Monitoring. Some of you might know as Bizrights. So we're very pleased to be hosting this session at the invitation of Infor. Consider Solutions are a gold channel partner of Infor's, and we do a lot of work, as many of you know, around the Approva world. So welcome wherever you are. We know we've got people here from North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. And for some of you it's late in the evening. I appreciate that. So welcome. The session is planned for 45 minutes. It may take up to 50 minutes because we've got a lot to tell you. But it is going to be recorded, so if you have to drop off after 45 minutes, don't worry. You will hear the whatever you missed at the end. So that's that. I'd like to welcome today's speakers. We are very pleased to have Pam Gallahar, who's the Approva subject matter expert at Infor in Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Pam. Very pleased also to have Steve Rooney, who's a consulting practice leader at Consider, who has run some major and continues to run major implementations and extensions of the Approva technology in companies around the world. So that's Steve. My name is Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions, and I'm kind of MC for the day with a few bits of observation and my own personal experiences to add to it. So our objectives for the day are to introduce you to the latest capabilities and customer impact of the technologies associated with Infor Approva Continuous Monitoring. And that includes latest releases and particularly the version 10 capability. We want to share some insights, experience, and best practices because, as we all know, technology is only part of this journey. You need to work out how to get the best out of it. We're going to share some tips to maximize your return from this. And we're going to share 3 things you didn't know about Infor Approva Continuous Monitoring. And in terms of an agenda, I'm here to provide the introduction objectives. I'm going to talk a little bit about visibility of financial processes and controls because essentially that's what we're applying this technology for. I'm going to hand over to Pam, who's going to talk about what's new in Approva. And then Steve is going to share some experiences from the field about augmenting the technology for success and return on investment to really deliver the value that the organization needs today. I'm going to come back at the end with 3 things you didn't know. We're going to have a wrap-up and a Q&A. Now, you will see on your interface you have the opportunity to ask questions as we go through. Please do. Ask questions as we go through, enter into the panel, and we'll endeavor to answer those at the end of the session. If we don't have time, we will deal with them by email afterwards, so you will get a response. If you've got a technical problem, please do the same thing, use the same interface, and somebody smarter than I will respond to you and help you out. So that's a primary use of the interface. So watch and listen, but please ask questions. If you don't ask a question, you've got to ask yourself, I must have something to ask. There must be something they're not telling me. So before I start, or before we get into the meat of it, it's interesting when you look at GRC technologies in general, not just Approva, but the common challenges organizations are facing as we talk to them around the world are these. So organizations have usually started out with some kind of segregation of duties activity, but people are looking more and more at how do we automate business controls on a broad base around the world, around the organization, both centrally and in operating units. How do we reduce the effort and time it takes to do this, increase the assurance, and ultimately make it a more pleasant experience and a better assured experience. We also have this big issue which is constantly on the minds, particularly for those in the IT organization own the cost of this, but also from a business perspective, the elapsed time is an issue. This concept of compliant user access provisioning. How do we shorten the time scale to get new users or users with change requirements provisioned into our financial systems, our ERP systems, rapidly with the appropriate level of control and compliance, and take the load off central support units so they don't need to do mundane tasks to get this done. So that's a big issue, and some organizations are taking 3 to 4 weeks to get this done elapsed time, and if that affects it certainly affects your efficiency and effectiveness. In some organizations it affects revenue as well. Third one, fire call, firefighter, emergency access, whatever you call it. Organizations or people in the organization, both in IT and in the business, who need to have elevated access to get access to systems to do special things, whether it is IT-related stuff or whether it's opening closed accounting periods because of a mistake. You need to be able to have elevated access. It's a major audit issue. We need to work out how to do that. The issue about roles and permissions. How do we make sure that our design of roles and permissions and changes to it is a compliant process, and we can have evidence for it for audit? It's typically a very manual process. System configuration monitoring. How do we make sure that our complex systems, the configurations that seem so easy when you read it in a manual, but these settings are appropriate and set consistently? Attestation of user access, irrespective of SOD. How do we make sure that we can tell on a quarterly or annual basis that the right people have access to the systems, and people who've left or gone on to different jobs no longer have access? And the final one there, bridging the gap between IT or ERP compliance and business compliance. A big issue for many organizations is to have the right level of skills and understanding to take what is quite complex within the ERP system, but very pivotal within the business world, how to bridge that gap so we can get that done. And obviously there's how do you manage the technology, the GRC tools to maximize the return. So these are some of the common challenges. If you've got other ones, obviously let us know, but these are kind of the things that stimulated some of these discussions, and we're going to talk about a number of these today. So let's just think, first of all, why we're applying tools like Approva or any other GRC tool for continuous monitoring. Fundamentally, we're trying to assure our internal controls of financial reporting, and we need to think about some of the basic challenges here, because when we think about the tools, such as Approva, we tend to think about the controls a lot, but we need to also think about the risk that the controls are there to mitigate. So this picture, many of you have seen before. It's my favorite picture, so you'll see it every time. This is the entry point to a parking lot. As you drive in, if you see the red arrow, there is hidden in the middle there a little automated parking barrier, an automated control. So people driving in have to swipe their employee ID card. It recognizes them, opens up, and they go in. And the same thing on the way out. That's all good. And of course, every 3 months, the provider of the electronic barrier comes in and they prove and they attest that yes, this works 100% of the time. Anytime you swipe a card, it opens. If it's not a valid card, it doesn't open. It's perfect. And they sign it off and they pay another year's fee for the parking barrier. And when winter turns up, you start to see why that is a slightly myopic view of the world. So the parking barrier works 100% of the time, but actually the risk isn't mitigated 100% of the time. And it's really important for us to continue to think about, we have our dialogue between the various stakeholders. It's not just about the control, it's about the risk. And that's all I'm going to say about that for right now, but it comes back in some of the capabilities as we talk about the technology. Now we know that ineffective controls erode our risk assurance, for sure, but they also erode performance. So it actually drives productivity loss. So whether or not the processes are being ignored and circumvented, or whether the policies can't be enforced, the difference between what should happen and what does happen has a number of impacts. One is it gives us audit compliance issues, which we all know and we've all experienced. But it also gives us issues to do with inefficiency, lack of productivity, which affects our basic cost of operation. So it's worth us bearing in mind that there are two reasons for doing this. One is compliance, and one is just making sure our businesses operate efficiently. Now, as we start to think about Approva and other technologies, and we think about continuous monitoring, and what are these tools actually doing to help us manage risk and monitor controls? The Gartner Group came up with a very good model a few years ago with its 4 layers. And if you see this going across horizontally, at the bottom of that, bottom 2 levels are about things that people can do, making sure that you're preventing things that could happen, classic preventive controls, and then looking at things that actually do happen, which you might regard as detective controls, to make sure that what your preventive controls are meant to be preventing actually are preventing. And of course, as we all know, we sometimes get a false sense of security about that, so it's important to have both. So at the bottom, see configuration of IT systems and processes. So do our systems allow anybody to do something inappropriate? So fundamental configuration settings of systems is an important issue. The second one there is access to applications, segregation of duties, sensitive access. Can people do things that are fundamentally a conflict of interest that could impact our financial statement? So I know many of you are in that world. But then we also need to think about the tire tracks. Think about that photograph I showed earlier about the parking lot. We need to think about, is the underlying data accurate and controlled? Is the changes to master data, which is inappropriate, whether or not it should or should not be able to be done, we need to know whether those things are happening. And then finally, the transactional data. Are the transactional activities happening outside the boundaries of our policies and controls? You need to understand those exceptions and perhaps we need to tighten up our controls. So this balance between the detective and preventive. And we like to think about this also within three lenses, because the interesting piece is in our work around the world in finance processes, there's three ways of looking at this, and most of us here in this discussion are focused on financial control and compliance. We're using Approva or other tools to monitor our controls so we can assure ourselves from an audit perspective and Sarbanes-Oxley or other regulatory perspective that our financial controls are in good shape and they're working appropriately and effectively. But there's a broader level of risk assurance which may not be material from a financial control point of view, but it may be to do with fraud, error, waste, other forms of compliance which are not financial control related. So we need to be able to look at that. And thirdly, we need to be able to have the ability to optimize our finance processes so they're streamlined and efficient and effective, and any places where they're not working as expected, we can flag those up and re-engineer our processes so they work well. So I want you to think about the four layers of monitoring, but also the three lenses, and most of us are thinking in terms of the left-hand lens, financial control and compliance, but as you talk to your stakeholders, there's other issues as well you might want to consider. So that's just worth bearing in mind. And as we do this introduction, it's worth thinking about the fact that the underpinnings of our internal controls of financial reporting, whether under Sarbanes-Oxley or other regulations, all fundamentally under the COSO model. And the reason I mention that is that the COSO model has just gone through a big upgrade. It's COSO 2013, which we're all being encouraged to implement by the end of this year. So it describes the principles of effective internal control, which you all know, and it talks about the control activities we need and the monitoring activities we need, which you're implementing today to some extent with the GRC and Approva tools you use. So it's worth thinking about this particularly since we're going through this upgrade. In your organization, either you yourselves or your colleagues will be looking at how do we optimize our control environment to exploit what COSO 2013 recommends. And you can benefit from some of what you can do within Approva, and you certainly want to be part of that dialogue if you're running this for your organization. So that's COSO. And then very closely associated with COSO is the COBIT frameworks, which came out of ICFR and others, which basically talks about the relationship of this to the applications. So this is a very good model just for us all to remember. At the top level, we want to make sure that financial statements work, they're operating effectively, we're reporting the right stuff, so the balance sheet, income statement, cash flow, etc. look good. And that relates down to the individual business processes and classes of transactions, and that relates down to financial applications we run and the core IT that supports them. So it's kind of a good model to just remember we're not doing this just for the fun of supporting our ERP system. We're doing it for a particular purpose. So that's the eye-level model. And we also need to think about what are the types of controls that we are supporting for our organization. When we use GRC tools, we're very, very focused on automated controls. How do we monitor automated controls? Whether they are the authorizations model that allows us to monitor segregation of duties, whether it's the embedded controls. These automated controls, very important, but the research we've been doing with organizations around the world, some of the most highly rated, compliant and well-implemented financial control organizations, have given us feedback, and it's been supported by the Big Four, that actually the percentage of automated controls of the overall ICFR landscape, it tops out at about 25%. So 25% of your key financial controls are automated. And that's not just because we should automate more. There's some very good reasons why some of those will never be automated, because they're fundamentally manual, they require judgment, they require attestation. And there's controls which are IT dependent, they rely on data, but they do need some assessment and judgment. So it's important for us to think about all three classes of controls, particularly from a business point of view, we need to understand that, but also as we turn to exploiting these technologies, we need to work out how do we support the whole problem space, not just the 25%, if we're lucky, that's automated. So I'm going to talk you through the four areas, and you know about this one very well. So in terms of pillars assurance, we know from a financial assurance point of view, financial control, there's four things we've got to worry about. One is segregation of duties monitoring. We're doing that today. I'm sure all of you do that. This is the fundamental assurance that we don't have conflicts of interest which are going to cause potential impact on our financial statement. So that's all very good. Second piece is we've got a whole bunch of embedded controls in our ERP systems, our financial systems, which may be three-way matches, approvals, tolerances, all sorts of other stuff, mandatory information. But we need to make sure those settings, those embedded controls, are actually set. First of all, they're set at all. And secondly, they haven't been unset. And thirdly, they're set consistently across all of the landscape of vendors and customers and materials and all the rest of it. And this is an area of great interest as you start to do this. You monitor these embedded controls, and whilst you might think they're implemented, apparently they're not consistent. So that's the second one, monitoring the embedded controls in your ERP system. The third level is all about looking at the tire tracks, coming back to the parking lot. How do we monitor exceptions to business transactions which fall outside our policies and control limits? Now, yes, we might think, well, they shouldn't happen because we're meant to have segregation duties and other things. There's a whole lot of reasons why they might happen. So we need to have this third level of assurance about validating master data and transactions and making sure that our business processes are working within the parameters we set. And the fourth level, which is an interesting one, I talked about the 25% automated controls. By implication, that means at worst case, or at the minimum, 75% of our controls are either manual or IT dependent. And this is basically like the iceberg. You know, the automated controls monitoring, which we spend a lot of time on with our GRC tools, is just the tip of the iceberg. But this large lump beneath the surface is just as valuable and just as critical in terms of managing the assurance of our business. So these things can sink the ship. So this is the fourth level of assurance, which is about making sure those manual controls and IT-dependent controls, which you cannot completely automate, have some level of oversight and attestation that you can get some reasonable assurance your business is operating well. So this, we're going to talk about this as well. So there's the four levels of assurance. Very important to think about them all, because sometimes you can worry about SOD and perhaps forget about some of the other things that can sink the ship. And one final point here is, when we look at assurance, we're obviously looking at the risk in our business, but we run global businesses with regional operating units and all the rest of it. And the reality of those businesses, and some of those businesses are big, some of them are small, so we've got to make sure we balance the real risk, the financial risk and business risk of certain types of activity and the controls we put in place, but the reality of how we have to run the business. And that kind of also leads us to that discussion about where do you need compensating controls, where you cannot really fully remediate segregation duties issues, for example. So that's kind of a little introduction. I want you to think about that, because as we go through what's new in Approva, it applies to all of those four areas, and we need to think about risk and control in those four pillars of assurance. Well, what I'd like to do now is introduce Pam Gallahar, who's going to talk to us about what's new in Approva. So, Pam, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And good afternoon, good morning, folks. My name is Pam Gallahar. I've been with Approva products for about 9 years now, and I've known Dan and Consider Solutions about that long as well. We've enjoyed a great partnership in bringing solutions to customers in different parts of the world. And I appreciate the opportunity to join in the WebEx today. I've got a highlight, some slides I'm going to step you through, talking through these particular points. One in particular, the Approva capabilities. So it'll be kind of a high-level look as the capabilities extend and highlight throughout the exception life cycle. You'll hear me say the term maybe closed-loop remediation. We'll talk to that in pictures, and I'll explain the steps associated with that. And give you a little bit of a use case example from a certification manager. We'll talk about it generally, how folks use it, but a customer has also used it in a very creative application specific to a need that his organization experienced, and I'd like to step you through that as well. Followed by then contextual insights. Some of these words may be familiar to you. Hopefully as I present you'll see maybe to be able to leverage additional work that you've done with Approva, talking about drill down, drill around, root cause analysis, bringing in additional metrics, not at face value it seems, but by pulling information together we can present additional information for you too with the end case, if you will, the end goal, that next point, case management. Be able to manage those exceptions and violations. Be it me as a reviewer making that final determination, or maybe I assign out management of a particular exception to Dan. The ability to have a tiered exception or a tiered management structure as well. Along with, of course, and for times now, the very important capability of mobility. Show you an example of that, and then Steve Rooney will follow up with just some great use cases for mobility that he can highlight too. I'll sprinkle in also some performance and some extraction, analysis, performance improvements that we've made in a couple of other areas too. Finally then followed by the adapter updates. Big list, a lot of adapters to give you comfort as to kind of where we are, where we're going, and where we continue our efforts. But first off, really, that exception life cycle, and Dan may have mentioned, really I generally start Approva, most of you may know, but exception-based monitoring solution. And the colored buttons that you see here around can kind of track the progress and
I think we've lost Pam. Are you there, Pam? Obviously, telephone services in Dallas aren't what they are in other parts of the world. So just hold with us for 30 seconds while we work out what's going on here. Okay, Pam, we can't hear you. So we've lost Pam. So I'm going to take over for Pam because I've heard this before. So the point about the exception lifecycle, when you get back on, Pam, you can just take over straight away because you sound much better than I do. But in terms of the exception lifecycle, the whole model with Approva is all about getting alerts about things that are outside policy constraints, whether it's segregation duties or embedded controls. View the context of what they, let's understand what's going on around the context, what's related to that. Let's investigate those issues. Let's take action, whether it's delegating to other people, and let's track the results. And let's get a more and more iteratively refined business model here. So Pam also talked about Certification Manager. Now, many of you use this technology. It's a component of Approva which deals with the end-to-end process for reviewing and certifying manual controls, of which the most obvious use case is user access rights, so user access attestation. So looking at that across applications, whether it's your ERP or many other business applications or shared file systems or network drives or whatever, so we know who's got access to sensitive data, and we can make sure local managers approve that the right people have access, and it's not people who've left the company or moved on to a different job. So from a user access certification point of view, this is very powerful because it takes out a very large and painfully manual administrative process, and the people who have to run it, always tell me it's an unpleasant activity, and they've got to chase up with managers who don't come back when they circulate these spreadsheets around. So doing this in an automated process is much more sensible. Management reporting, full audit trail, so when your auditors come in, they know you're doing the right thing. But as Pam kind of introduced earlier, there's a very good use case from one of our customers, Dennis Rush. We did a webcast called The Elephant in the Room. If you didn't see it, I suggest you have a look at it. The link is there. He's using the same technology to attest other manual controls as well as user access, including the attestation in general ledger month-end close, what they call the finance park and post review, which is basically manual journal entries for sensitive accounts. They get parked, somebody has to check them out, make sure they're valid, and say, yes, okay, we can put those in. So this is a very useful and interesting use case, and it's a growing example of the number of manual controls that people are looking at. So Certification Manager is certainly something that you should be interested in. And Pam also talked about Contextual Insight. So this is kind of some screenshots here from Approva. So you can drill in now for 360-degree view of exceptions and root cause analysis. We can look at similar exceptions by different people, other exceptions by the same person, around all of these key objects, which helps us understand what the real risk is and helps us take appropriate action. And then here also we see, as we say, look at specific objects. We say, okay, in this particular person, this particular invoice, are there any other issues around this invoice, for example? And then case management is a whole issue about when I get an exception, what am I going to do with it? It's all very well to get a big report of exceptions, whether they're segregation of duties violations or transactional data outside expected policy boundaries, but we need to be able to do something about it. And we need to be able to manage the exceptions. So if we see an issue in a central compliance role, we might want to assign the management of that to a local finance leader. We might want to have a collaborative discussion about what's going on here. Did we know what Peter's doing here? Is this what you expect or not? We can get some data around here. And then we can take action and look at reasons why that might be, and then get that closed loop process so we can actually fix that and move on. So that's kind of a powerful set of capabilities that helps us deal with things. Now mobility, we're going to hear two discussions on this. Steve Rooney is also going to talk about this. So mobility in the context, this is an example in the context of certification manager, but mobility is obviously a key issue right now. We're all on the road. When you've got to do, particularly to do with approvals, managing activity, you want to be able to, on your mobile device or on your iPad or whatever it is, you need to be able to get stuff, and when you're out on the road, do. So here's an example of certification manager, the to-do list, and getting things done and approving user access certifications in this case, or perhaps general ledger entries if that's your bag. Now, Pam also talked about, in version 10, improved data extraction performance, and suffice it to say that there's a whole bunch of activities going on here with some deeply technical improvements to do with threading and multi-threading and parallelism, and processing of large volumes of data, and being able to automatically select certain types of objects for extraction rather than extract the whole database. And there's some issues about if you get a failed extraction, be able to resume those without having to start again. So that's, you know, in large-scale implementations, that's a big issue. Improved analysis, a whole bunch of improved capabilities. Pam and Steve can give you more details on this if you have specific questions. But whether it's improved rule condition error checking, better alerting, better fuzzy logic matching in process insights, incremental analysis, these are all things that help. And just to top that off, the number of applications that Approva is connected to through package adapter seems to be growing by the month. Here's the latest set. Obviously, the full set of SAP capabilities, the R3, ECC, CRM, NetWeaver, BI, the whole 9 yards. This is the Enterprise Portal, SCM, SRM, the Oracle e-Business Suite, PeopleSoft, and then a bunch of the Infor applications through the middleware, the Infor Ion, legacy data loader. So that's an important piece. Some systems, we've got some systems customers, Lawson, and so on. And that's just the ones that are package adapters. We're going to talk later about the applications which are supported beyond that through configured adapters. That's kind of a quick run through. Pam, I hope I did you justice. You've got to talk to your local Texas telephone supply company. They need some help. Maybe they need help in compliance as well, who knows. But so that's that. I would like to pass over now to Steve Rooney, who's going to talk a little bit about augmenting this technology for success and return on investment. Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. So just to reintroduce myself, I'm Steve Rooney. I work as a consulting practice leader at Consider Solutions, working with many companies on their risk and compliance projects. So Dan and Pam initially has taken us through some of the more recent updates to Approva. These updates are focused on connectivity to many different systems, infrastructure, and providing broader functional capabilities within the three lenses that Dan described. Approva provides a very effective tool. However, as we all know, a tool alone does not solve the challenges. It's how we use and manage the tool that makes a difference in terms of getting the job done and having a clear understanding of its place within the wider business process and technical context. And there also may be further opportunities to maximize the return we're getting from the investment in the tool. So today we're going to discuss some key areas in this respect and share some insights and experience in terms of best use and management of the technology, useful ways to complement the technology with extensions and integrations to enable best fit with your business and technical environments, and some practical and pragmatic working approaches. So let's start with remediation. So you've got Approva installed and working, you've analyzed your systems, you know where the risks are, but now you need to ensure action is taken to address those risks. Now this is a business responsibility, but it requires a level of technical understanding combined with business process insight to be able to make informed decisions on what actions to take. An approach that rarely works is to simply send out a set of reports and hope the business process owners will spend time understanding and actioning. The raw report output is typically not enough in itself to drive the action needed, regardless of what tool is used. In some cases, IT help out and act on behalf of the business. Now, this ultimately increases the overall workload, extends the timescales, and does not instill the needed business ownership. It's not the right way to do it. Now, our experience is the remediation process needs to be driven and facilitated. The business process owners need help to interpret the reported risks within the ERP systems and understand what options are available to address the risk, whether that is modifying the system access to eliminate the risk or mitigating the risk through use of a compensating control. So focused effort is needed, ideally by a remediation team, such that that focused effort can achieve what's needed and minimize the pain in getting to where we need to get to for all parties. The team needs a combination of business process insight and technical expertise. They take the raw violation output, combine that with an understanding of the business organization, and prepare an assessment with prioritization, implications, and decision lists. This assessment is then used to drive business review workshops with the business process owners. And by taking the insights to the business, both business and technical, with guidance and recommendations on what actions to take, the business are then better equipped and more prepared to take ownership. And the remediation activities can be completed in a more timely and efficient manner. So ultimately, an approach like this means the use of senior finance staff is efficient and effective, the overall cost and effort is reduced, frustrations on all sides are minimized, and there's a better chance that the business take real ownership of the risks and the actions to be taken. So to summarize the approach that we have found to work well, before going to the business with the results of the risk analysis, do a review, understand the patterns, and prepare information and guidance. Then take that to the business in a series of workshops to review and confirm the actions to be taken. Then execute those agreed actions to remediate the risks, and finally review the progress and ensure the agreed actions are taken. The key objective is to ensure ownership of the risk, and the remediation activities is acknowledged and accepted as a business responsibility. And this needs understanding. Sending the reports out alone will not achieve this. Another challenging area is the ownership and execution of compensating controls. At the time of remediation, it may seem an easy and somewhat attractive option to address an SOD risk by excluding a user from the regular report and assigning a compensating control. However, that means the compensating control must be executed on an ongoing basis and evidence retained. This is particularly challenging if the ownership of the execution of the compensating control is not recognized and the execution of the control relies on manual checks. Sometimes this doesn't get noticed until the audit reviews. So what can help here, and where Approva can help in this context, is firstly automating the monitoring of the executed transactions to report on an exception basis when there is a potential SOD risk. So watching all of the, for example, invoices, and if an invoice is created by the same person that created the vendor related to that invoice, then report that as an exception. And then secondly, having a periodic review and assertion of the compensating controls in place, such that the business reviewers have to regularly review all of the exclusions, compensating controls relevant to their business area, and assert that they agree with the mitigation in place and they accept responsibility for that. The gain to be achieved here is reducing the effort in executing the controls, having the evidence for the audit cycles automatically available, and reinforcing the business ownership. So here's an example of how Approva automates the monitoring for SOD risks. So here we are reporting that a given user has created a vendor master record and now has processed an invoice for that same vendor. So on an automated basis, Approva's watching all of the transactions that are executed and then reporting where exceptions may occur. So moving on, Dan touched on COSO earlier, and as he said, COSO is the context for many of the controls we implement and for much of what is done in Approva. And COSO 2013 requires us to look again at the controls we have and ensure we have appropriate and adequate control over the business. But this is also an opportunity to review at different levels our controls, including the level of automation in place. The key questions in this context: first of all, confirming the set of controls needed, rationalizing wherever possible. Then review in terms of automation. Can we automate more? For example, are there opportunities to use Approva on a wider basis, such as automating compensating controls that we spoke about a moment ago? Also, are there opportunities with the controls that are not fully automated? Can some level of automation help? And that's a point I'll come back to a little later. So we've covered some topics in terms of getting the job done for remediation, mitigation, and implementing COSO 2013. Now let's look at some areas where further value can be achieved from the investment in Approva. As Dan mentioned earlier, a key area that is a challenge for many companies is that of user access provisioning. Creating new users in the ERP systems and granting additional access to existing users in a timely and efficient way to ensure the business can run effectively, and lack of appropriate system access does not hold the business back. The challenges here are that sometimes that's a labor-intensive activity, so there may be a central admin team or help desk that has to manually process the requests and interpret them before requesting the specific technical access in the ERP system, and the communications around the request can be somewhat cumbersome. And in some cases where access requirements are particularly dynamic, we've seen it taking 3 or 4 weeks to turn around access change requests. So this can have a significant impact on the business operation and can in itself lead to compromising the controls we have in place. So an effective solution that we've implemented elsewhere is to enable user self-service by integrating an easy-to-use request page with the provisioning workflow in Approva. This helps to achieve improved efficiency whilst retaining the necessary control. So the potential gains here are that virtually all of your requests can then be fully automatic in terms of the request from the originating user through to the approval process and ultimately the provisioning. The accessibility for those users requiring new access, there's 24/7 access to the request page, so they can make their request whenever necessary around the world. And that administrative capacity that is many times needed today is freed up to do more valuable work. So here's a typical model of how things currently operate in many companies. So the business user communicates their requirement, a service desk interprets that, and puts in the request which is appropriate for the ERP application. The SOD check is done in Approva, and then the approval workflows, the required approvers review the request and approve as necessary. The request is then provisioned into the ERP. This next slide shows how the model works with self-service in place. So in this case, the business user has a friendly screen that uses terms understandable by the business, enters their request, that automatically gets mapped into what's needed within the ERP, and then goes through into the regular SOD check and the approval workflows. As a further alternative, if you have an identity management system in place, then it makes sense to use that system as your primary requesting mechanism. The IDM system will typically manage the requests and the workflows, but it can be integrated with Approva to carry out the SOD check to ensure necessary control is retained. And we've implemented this model at a number of companies. To further help with making the change request and approval cycle as efficient and easy to process as possible, we see mobile access to review and approve the request as significant. Here's an example of some work we have done in this respect. So this example is on my iPhone. I can see all of the requests that are awaiting my approval. I can drill into the request to see the details of what has been requested and whether that causes any SOD violations. And then finally, I can approve or reject. And that's interacting with the back-end workflow within Approva. So at this point, I think Dan has a question for you.
Yeah, this topic of mobility comes up quite a lot. So I'm interested particularly, I mean, mobility is a big topic. And we've got, from the work we do, we've got some observations about what the most critical areas are. But we're interested, if mobility is important to your organization, interested in your feedback in what is the highest priority area or areas you think that you need for Approva or other applications, but particularly Approva, to have mobile access. So here's some examples. Is it the violation browser? Is it what-if requests? So you've got to, is it dashboards? Is it to-do lists? Is it these access management requests? Is it approvals and requests in user provisioning? Or is it certification manager reviews or something else? If mobility is important to you, please think about that. Just pop off an email straight away to Steve at Rooney@consider.biz. The email address is there, very simple. But if mobility is important to you, we're trying to understand what the critical areas are, because it's kind of relevant to some of the work we do, and we'll share that back with you. So if you give us your priority areas, we'll share back with you. So please send that email. If mobility is not important to you, I mean, actually, even mobility not being important is worth telling us. But most people we speak to say, no, mobility is more and more important as we're using, we're trying to be on the go all the time. So please do that. So back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Dan. So just to continue on the theme of how do we optimize return, again, a theme that Dan touched on earlier was the controls that are not fully automated. Our research indicates that less than 25% of the total controls in place in our financial controls in any company is less than 25%, and 25% is best case. Therefore, a great deal of manual effort is still required to execute the remaining 75%. So how can we optimize the process around these controls and reduce the effort? Now, this is where Approva Certification Manager can help. Using the Certification Manager, we can automate the data gathering, automate the review workflows, collate the responses from disparate business units, and automatically provide audit-ready reports. The things we're looking to gain from this are to have a single central place to manage the control attestation, use automation to the best effect, and lower the overall operational cost of running our controls. If we look at the landscape of internal controls, the primary focus tends to be on the preventive controls that can be automated, so the green boxes here. However, as we said, that's maximum 25%. many of the detective controls remain manual or partially manual, and this is where there is potential for further automation and savings. Brief example of what a typical manual process would look like. It involves gathering the data from the systems where the control relates to, formatting that data, typically getting it into spreadsheets, maybe sharing that via emails, chasing for the responses, collating those responses. And in some cases, we know it takes sometimes so long to complete some of the periodic reviews, the next review is started before the previous review is complete. And that's when it gets even more complex. So types of attestation where certification can help. Firstly, a simple, yes, we have done it, but with no evidence. For obvious reasons, in many cases, this is not sufficient. And COSO 2013 reinforces that. Secondly, yes, we have done it, and here is the evidence to prove it. And thirdly, regular reviews of key data controlled elements to attest as okay or to reject. So this could be user access to your financial systems. It could be manual financial transactions that need approval or rejection. It could be things like price book changes. So anywhere where there is a manual review required of key data within the system. This is how it can look like it from a spreadsheet model, so potentially a number of spreadsheets with different tabs, detailed information. Certification Manager removes the need for spreadsheets and provides a single central user interface to execute and manage the reviews. So finally, this is my final slide. Approva is focused on providing the core solution to the business, but to complement the core functionality and to help optimize return, we have developed a range of utilities to help with operational management. We talked about the self-service portal. For reporting, Approva comes with a wide range of standard reports, but many times companies like them to be slightly different formats and want to fully align the reports to your own way of working. To optimize the communication with your business community. And building customer reports against some of the standard operational schemas requires specialist technical knowledge. So the solution here is to provide a simplified data schema designed for reporting. The reporting schema is automatically produced, and that means that the building and the modification of the reports is something that does no longer need the specific technical knowledge. For Quick Dash, the issue we're looking to handle here is that sometimes it's difficult to keep an ongoing eye on the technical health of servers. So things like, are the services running? Are we running out of space? We may have many servers that we rely on in this respect. So Quick Dash provides a single dashboard to oversee the health of all servers. So that means that we can proactively manage them. It means that we're not so the risk of stability and robustness issues are minimized, and ultimately we avoid those unnecessary interruptions to services. Finally, the rule manager. Challenge here is to make sure that our rules and our business tasks within the rules are consistent and free from error, and also to make sure they're up to date relative to best practice. So the rule manager provides an automated utility to review and analyze your rules and the business tasks within them, identifying any inconsistencies, errors, and variance from best practice. And the goal here is to keep a high quality and consistent rule set aligned with best practice.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Pam. So we've had a kind of a spin through what's new in the Approva technology. We've had some very interesting insights into how to maximize the return you get from exploiting the technology. And now it's my task just to tell you the 3 things you didn't know. And since I've been schooled in risk management, I've now decided 3 things you probably didn't know. So And to further the risk management approach, I've thought of giving more than 3. Let's make 5, and of those 3 of them you probably didn't know. I think this discussion about 75-25 iceberg is a critical one. We're seeing this more and more. Continuous monitoring is not just about ERP controls, which is the 25%. If you're best in class, 25% of your financial controls are automated. That's if you're best. 75% are manual IT dependent. So we've got to work out how to address that need under the water for this automated manual hybrid model for all our controls. The whole issue about self-service user access provisioning, and this is all independent of technology because it's the same thing whether you use Approva or other GRC tools. These issues are very similar. You need to be able to have a self-service user provisioning capability without a 7-year identity management implementation. So we've seen this reducing central workload by dramatic amounts, and it's pretty obvious. If you don't have to do the basic requests and basic approvals, then it's straight through processing. So it allows your central service units, your sub-security units, your central support units to give a high value contribution to things that matter. We saw those Approva adapters, but over and above that, you can see Approva monitoring 50+ application types out there. But all of the stuff you saw in the adapter level, plus homegrown banking systems, specialized inventory management systems, all sorts of applications through the configured studios. So that's growing by the month. I think this whole issue about optimization, we spent a lot of time worrying about automation of internal controls. Now it's all about optimization. How do we apply COSO 2013 thinking to reduce and focus our controls and make sure we're doing the right thing? So we can use Approva to make sure we do the optimization. And the balance between controls monitoring pillars. Are we getting the right balance between preventive and detective? Are we checking the tire tracks as well as the parking barrier? And segregation duties, whatever technology you use, and it really, from all the discussions we have, it makes no difference what technology you use. SOD efforts stall if remediation is not owned by the business. And the more the tools are very technical, the more likely it is going to stall. And quite often people don't have the skills to have that business analysis discussion with finance leaders and business leaders around the world. So we need to find ways, minimizing the threshold for business to act as a key thing. So these are 5 things which I think are big deals. Hopefully 3 of those were new to you today. If they weren't, I apologize. Perhaps you should have been given the webcast. In terms of who uses Approva, a lot of organizations around the world. There's still some great names here, and many of you are on this call. So here's some of the people in that game. From a consider point of view, we are not Approva specific. We do focus on solutions for world-class finance, and financial control and compliance, in which this discussion falls under, is a key part of what we do. We also do broader risk assurance and finance process optimization, as we mentioned earlier. And some of the things we do are identified there. And I think it's fairly self-evident that what we're trying to do in the financial control and compliance world is the risk management element of world-class finance, but also work on reducing the cost of finance and helping optimize cash flow and other elements. So I'm very well aware, as I promised you, it was going to take more than 45 minutes. It has, 50 minutes. If you've got any other questions, I know you've got a bunch of questions on the service here. If you've got other questions that you haven't entered yet, either email them to me, that's my email address, Dan French, or Todd Liberty, who helped organize this at Infor. Todd is one of the senior officers, CFO guys, and I know he's on this webcast, so email him if you want to talk to Infor specifically. You'll get to the right person. We haven't got time to go through many questions. I will ask just one question of your list here, and the rest we'll deal by email. We've got one question here. Just using Approva for SOD, what's logical sequence to address these new capabilities? Certification, configuration, transaction monitoring. So, Steve, do you want to give us a quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it does depend on each organisation, but the first thing to think about is what is most important from a business sense. So where would the priority be? So, i.e., is the primary concern process assurance? Is it reducing costs in terms of certification or controls execution? Do you have issues with ensuring your compensating controls are executed? So work out from a business sense what's the most important thing, and then I would say use that to guide where you start.
Thanks, Steve. Obviously, there's a lot behind that, so if you've got any questions about that, feel free to email Steve. You saw his email address earlier, Rooney, consider.biz, or myself and Todd, and we can get you to the right people. We've overrun our 45 minutes, as promised. Hope you found it useful. If you've got any questions or you want to dig into any of these things, please let us know. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it. It's late for some of you and early for others. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks a lot.